Journey of Roman Soldiers in the War with Germania. Chapter 1. The Call to Conquer. The Roman Empire was the most powerful civilization in the ancient world, and its legions were the embodiment of Roman discipline and military might. The empire had expanded its borders across Europe, North Africa, and Asia, but there was one region that still stood defiant against Roman control: the land of the Germanic tribes. This wild and untamed territory lay beyond the Rhine River, stretching across dense forests and marshy terrain, home to fiercely independent peoples who had long resisted foreign domination. For the Roman soldiers, the journey into Germania would be unlike any other. Many had fought in distant lands, but none had faced the kind of resistance that awaited them on the other side of the Rhine. As the Roman legions prepared for their northern campaign, the soldiers knew this would not be a simple conquest. They were about to enter a land of unyielding warriors, a place where their familiar tactics and formations would be tested in ways they had never imagined. Among these soldiers was Gaius, a young and eager legionary, eager to prove himself. He had served in campaigns across Gaul, and now he was being sent to Germania with the belief that his discipline and training would see him through. But as they prepared to cross the Rhine, he could not shake the feeling of uncertainty that gnawed at him. The Germanic tribes were not like the Gauls. They were fierce, elusive, and, above all, united in their determination to preserve their land from Roman rule. Chapter 2. Crossing the Rhine. The Rhine River had long served as a boundary between the Roman Empire and the barbarian lands to the north. For years, the Romans had used it as a natural defense, but with the ambitions of Emperor Augustus and his successors, the Rhine would become the starting point for a campaign that sought to bring Germania under Roman control. Gaius and his comrades watched as the Roman engineers built bridges to allow the army to cross into enemy territory. The construction of these military bridges, engineered with Roman precision, was a feat that both awed and filled the soldiers with apprehension. On one hand, the Romans were showcasing their dominance and engineering superiority. On the other hand, crossing the river meant they were now stepping into the unknown, into the heart of Germania, where ambushes and constant danger awaited. The moment the legions crossed the Rhine, the soldiers felt a sense of unease. The terrain beyond the river was vastly different from the open fields of Gaul. The dense forests and swamplands of Germania were difficult to navigate, and the Roman soldiers, who had been trained for open battlefields, now had to adapt to the brutal and unfamiliar environment. The sounds of the forest, the rustling leaves, distant animal calls, and the eerie silence between battles only added to the tension. For Gaius, the once constant sound of the Roman legion's march was now replaced by a feeling of uncertainty. This was no longer a straightforward military campaign. They were surrounded by an enemy who knew the land far better than they did, and the soldiers had no choice but to march on with grim determination. Chapter 3. The First Encounters. As the Roman legions marched deeper into Germania, the first encounters with the Germanic tribes began. The Germanic warriors, often described as barbaric by the Romans, proved to be highly skilled fighters, well-versed in the ways of ambushes and guerrilla tactics. They fought in small, fast-moving groups, attacking swiftly and then retreating into the forest before the Romans could regroup. The Romans, accustomed to fighting in rigid formations with their discipline and armor, found themselves at a disadvantage. The open, organized battle that they were used to was nearly impossible in the thick forests of Germania. The Germanic warriors were light on their feet, striking with precision and disappearing into the undergrowth. For Gaius and his fellow legionaries, this was a new and terrifying experience. They had been trained to fight in formation, to rely on their shields and swords, but here in the forest, those tools were not as effective. The first skirmishes were brief but intense. Gaius witnessed his comrades fall, unable to defend against the sudden attacks. The Germanic warriors would strike, often using the trees and hills to their advantage, and then disappear into the shadows. Roman soldiers, despite their best efforts, could not replicate the Germanic style of warfare. The Romans relied on their formations, their ranks, but in the forest, the strength of discipline was sometimes their weakness. The realization dawned on Gaius and his comrades that the Romans were not invincible. Their strength lay in their numbers and organization, But these strengths were not suited to the unpredictable nature of the forest. The fight for control of Germania would not be won through brute force alone. The first skirmishes were brief but intense. Gaius witnessed his comrades fall, unable to defend against the sudden attacks. The Germanic warriors would strike, often using the trees and hills to their advantage, and then disappear into the shadows. Roman soldiers, despite their best efforts, could not replicate the Germanic style of warfare. The Romans relied on their formations, their ranks, but in the forest, the strength of discipline was sometimes their weakness. The realization dawned on Gaius and his comrades that the Romans were not invincible. Their strength lay in their numbers and organization, but these strengths were not suited to the unpredictable nature of the forest. The fight for control of Germania would not be won through brute force alone. Chapter 4. The Ambush at Teutoburg Forest. In 9 CE, Gaius's journey with the legions would take a disastrous turn at the Battle of Teutoburg Forest. Led by General Publius Quinctilius Varus, the Romans were on a mission to subdue the Germanic tribes once and for all. The legions were marching deeper into the forest, confident in their discipline and readiness, when the Germanic warriors, led by Arminius, set their trap. Arminius, once a trusted Roman ally, knew the Romans better than they knew themselves. He had been raised in Rome and trained in Roman military tactics, giving him an edge over Varus and his army. He had united the Germanic tribes into a coalition and lured the Romans into the heart of Teutoburg Forest, where the dense woods and terrain would neutralize the Roman formations. The ambush was swift and brutal. The Romans, marching through the narrow forest paths, were attacked from all sides. Gaius, who had experienced skirmishes before, suddenly found himself in the middle of a battle unlike any he had fought. The once structured ranks of the Roman legions disintegrated under the pressure. The Roman soldiers were overwhelmed by the ferocity and agility of the Germanic warriors, who knew the land and the tactics that could break Roman discipline. For days, the battle raged as the Romans tried desperately to regroup and escape, but the Germanic tribes, under Arminius's leadership, harassed them relentlessly. The forest became a prison for the Romans. As the battle progressed, the Romans were systematically slaughtered. Over 20,000 soldiers, including Gaius's comrades, were killed or taken prisoner. The once mighty Roman legions were crushed, and their defeat was total. General Varus, unable to bear the disgrace of his failure, took his own life. The loss at Teutoburg Forest was a catastrophic blow to Roman ambition in Germania. It shattered the myth of Roman invincibility and sent shockwaves throughout the empire. For Gaius and the surviving soldiers, it marked a moment of deep personal loss and a turning point in their journey. Chapter 5. The Road Back and Roman Reflection. The survivors of Teutoburg Forest did not have the luxury of returning to their homes in triumph. Instead, they were forced to march back to Roman-controlled territory, carrying the shame of their defeat. For Gaius, the journey back was a grim and reflective one. His comrades, who had once marched confidently into Germania, were now scattered and broken. The defeat at Teutoburg Forest was not just a military failure. It was a psychological blow that would take years to heal. The Roman Empire, though shaken, was not ready to abandon its ambitions in Germania. Emperor Augustus, though devastated by the loss, eventually sent new leaders to avenge the defeat and restore Roman pride. However, the journey of Gaius and his comrades was not one of simple retaliation. The Germans had proven their resilience, and the conflict with the Germanic tribes would continue for years to come, with Roman soldiers facing an ever more determined enemy. For Gaius, the journey through Germania had been a crucible, a test not just of his military skill, but of his endurance and spirit. He had seen firsthand the cost of empire, the toll it took on soldiers, and the human cost of war. Though the Romans would return to fight again, the scars of Teutoburg Forest would forever shape the way they viewed their place in the world. Chapter 6. The Legacy of Resistance. The journey of Roman soldiers in the war with Germania was not just about battles fought on the field, but about the clash of cultures, tactics, and ideologies. The Romans, though formidable in their own right, faced an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. The Germans, though often fragmented, proved that their unity in resistance was stronger than any individual Roman victory. Gaius's journey was just one among many that highlighted the futility of Roman attempts to subdue the Germanic tribes entirely. The Roman-Germanic wars were a story of enduring resistance, of how the Germanic tribes, with their knowledge of the land and their unyielding will, held off one of the greatest empires the world had ever known. The legacy of this struggle, the bloody battles, the ambushes, and the relentless pursuit of victory by both sides, would be remembered for centuries. The Romans, despite their defeats, would continue to influence the world in other ways, but their failure to conquer Germania marked a moment where the tides of history shifted. The Germanic tribes, who had once been seen as barbarians, would go on to shape the future of Europe, and the journey of Roman soldiers in the war with Germania became a story of the limits of empire and the enduring power of resistance.